I'm gonna have to go back and forth between clicking the slides and then also advancing the slide for my speaker notes. So there's gonna be some moments of confusion about which slide I'm on. I'm just gonna get that out of the way, out of the gate. So I'm here to talk about giant freaking puppets. Who here has seen one of the giant freaking puppets at Treefort over the years? Yeah. If you have not, we have been building large-scale puppets for a long time and bringing them to Treefort. I think our first puppet appearance at Treefort was in 2013. So my, how time flies. And then also it's kind of fun to get to reflect on this process of, you don't set out to become a puppeteer. It's a thing that creeps up on you. And one day you wake up and you're like, I guess that's me. I'm a large-scale puppeteer. I work with a group called the Colossal Collective, and it's a really special group of people. It's an awesome blend of talents and skills, and it's such a pleasure and a privilege to get to work with them in this highly collaborative way to build these really cool creatures that none of us could build on our own. So it's an entirely a labor of love. It is purely for the reactions that we get and the appreciation and the joy we get to spread in the world. So what I'm gonna do is talk about, first off, why we're building puppets. Then I'm gonna go through a little bit of our history and some of the path, sort of how I got to this point or how we got to this point of building these things. It creeps up on you and it's iterative and there's a lot of learning that happens along the way. I'm gonna talk through our process, how we go through building a giant large-scale puppet. And then I'm gonna briefly talk about the puppet that we have out here at this event. It's not gonna be in the room because it wouldn't fit. It's too tall to fit in this ceiling, and you can see it down at the main stage area. It'll be down there the entire week. So if you haven't, not many people have seen our current puppet yet, but I hope that you all do get to over time. Okay, so I'm gonna start out with a little bit of a prompt. What is the most influential art form that you know of or that you've ever seen? I'm gonna propose this guy, Jacques-Louis David, okay? He lived in the late 1700s in France, part of the Enlightenment movement. In 1785, the monarch, King Louis XVI, commissioned a painting. He said, David, you're one of the best painters that we know of. I want you to paint something that props up my empire and makes me feel good and supported as a king. So he painted this. It depicts three Roman brothers swearing their allegiance to the emperor and pledging their lives to go defend Rome. But here's the thing, David was actually kind of opposed to the king. He didn't really support the king. And so he was hired to make this painting, but what he did was he basically commissioned, the king commissioned this painting to imply that the people should be a loyal servant to their king, but instead it kind of had the opposite effect. It depicts these three brothers pledging themselves to a cause that's bigger than themselves. They're seeing each other and their brotherhood and their allegiance to these ideas as more important than just the emperor of Rome. So even though it depicts these brothers joining themselves together and pledging to the emperor, it had kind of the opposite effect, and it created this movement of brotherhood and equality. This painting was largely credited for setting kind of the political undertones that led to the French Revolution and overthrew King Louis XVI. So then 15 years later, moving on, the French Revolution's happened. Napoleon is now in power, and this time, David is kind of a true believer in Napoleon's power. He paints this painting, which is Napoleon fearlessly crossing the Alps. It depicts him as this godlike conqueror and helping Napoleon strengthen his image as a military and political juggernaut and helped him consolidate his power. This portrait very much helped pave the way for Napoleon ascending to becoming the Emperor of France a few years later. So when I asked you that that question of what's the most impactful art form that you know of or that you've seen, I would like to recommend its photorealistic painting of epic scenes, and that you should all, if you want to make the biggest dent in our culture, study painting. Go become photorealistic painters. It's obviously not the case. It's a trick question. It is basically, what is the most impactful art form that you've seen? It's the stuff that you've seen. It's the things that you're exposed to in our culture. How did people consume culture in the late 1700s in France? This way. Most people were illiterate, and they had big salons in Paris where they'd paint, the painters would put up these scenes, and it would have this impact on the broader culture in a way that could disperse throughout the whole culture more effectively than anything else. If most people don't read, and this is like movies plus podcasts plus the internet all wrapped up in one, it has a really impactful way of transmitting ideas. This is how we interact now, and a painting is a really hard art form to break above the noise, the chatter, the like background of our culture. So when it comes to the why puppets, I think that has a lot to do with it. It's like there's something magical about a puppet that can move, and sometimes even move towards you. And there's this kind of awesome thing that happens in your brain when a giant puppet is bearing down upon you. The sort of reptile part of your brain gets stimulated, and you go, ah, a predator. Do I run? Do I fight? What do I do? So I think that I love the art form of these giant, larger-than-life creatures because they tickle that instinct, and they are able to, even for a brief moment, kind of extend above the background noise and make an impact. Okay, so the next thing I have to do, and I want to make this brief, but I have to talk quickly about the gesture of those Roman soldiers. I wish I didn't have to do this, but I think it's important, and just a quick little clarification. The Enlightenment painters were fascinated by classical Roman times. They romanticized them. There's not actually a lot of evidence that Romans used that gesture as a greeting, and fascist movements kind of wrongly assumed that outstretched arm salute was historically accurate. But in this context, it's an artistic symbol of unity, brotherhood, and a commitment to a great cause, and not necessarily a political statement about race or supremacy or blind loyalty to a leader. So I want to be pretty clear that misunderstanding helped create one of the most infamous, gestures of the 20th century. And so, like, to the fascists of the 30s who kind of misinterpreted that gesture and used it to rile up a bunch of horrible things, and the fascists who are kind of doing the same thing today, just fuck off. It's just, can't we just talk about the painting? So, our first puppet, I did this sort of in a vacuum, and I really didn't have much experience. I'd been to Burning Man and rearranged my appreciation about what art is and what it could be. And I studied art in college, and I got really good at, kind of diagnosing paintings like Jacques-Louis David's and at contextualizing my own art within the greater canon of like postmodernism. However, I went to Burning Man, and I had my first experience with like art that you can touch, art that you can climb, art that you can interact with and push and pull, and then also a lot of art that doesn't require necessarily the same amount of training and expertise, or doesn't necessarily require the same amount of precision or whatever. The barriers to entry can be quite low. So I was inspired, and I built this silly thing, this giant squid puppet. I made it out of like rope lights and trash, got a little bit of green fabric, ultra cheap, no help really, but here's the thing, I needed help operating it. And so I went to an event where I showed up with this pile of garbage, and I started assembling it, and then the next thing you know, people started asking me, what's that? And I said, well, if you'll help me for a little bit, I'll show you. And would you mind being a tentacle operator for just like 10 minutes, just to see? And so it was a great way to make friends, and also to sort of like, just like it really, this light bulb clicked of multiple people having to work together to do something is really satisfying for everybody. It's satisfying for the people doing it. And so I had several people who, after that, asked me like, hey, whatever project you do next, like count me in. I want to be a part of that. I was inspired, and I was like, let's go bigger. Let's go better. Let's build the largest land animal that ever roamed the face of the earth. And we built this incredible thing, this amazing, huge, 60-foot long, life-size sauropod puppet. We leveled up in some dramatic ways with regards to our like project management. We applied for a bunch of grants. We got some of them. And so we all of a sudden had a project that was See if we can get this. 10 times more expensive, 10 times the work, but I don't think it was 10 times cooler than that squid. Okay, so that was another like light bulb moment, you know? And that's when I drew this thing, which I think is true. You know, like that squid puppet puts a big smile on someone's face and makes a memory that can last for a long time. And it cost me $300. And there are movies that cost $300 million to make. And yes, they're broadcast further, but in the minds of the person that interacts with them, is it millions of times more impactful? I don't think you can say that. So there's definitely this like decreasing rate of return. And it's one of the reasons that I appreciate the scale and the like sloppiness and the messiness of the smaller scale, the like lower budget, the lower fidelity, From there, we built this swarm of really cool flying dragonflies, and we really tried to push ourselves in a different way. We tried to go like, hey, what if it was a modular puppet? And they were still kind of one experience. We had to really sort of like figure out a bunch of stuff. You know, this was 2013 or 14, and we had to figure out how to like battery power, like LED lights, and then wirelessly connect them, and then get them to all be communicating and controlled through a phone, which was hard at the time. And now it's like, oh gosh, technology has gotten so crazy, and you know, there's so much that you can just buy off the shelf and plug it straight in and it does it. But at the time, it was like a real lift to try to get that. I think that, you know, learning about this time is when I realized like, I've got something here, I love it. There's no shortage of cool creatures to model a puppet after, but what I need to get better at is the other stuff, right? The rest of the pile of skills that you need in order to pull off large projects. And so I went to business school and I got an MBA, learned about project management, people management, time management, budgeting, all these things. I think I was the only person who was at business school to become a better artist. And it was very like, oh gosh, I'm not trying to like climb up one rung higher in the corporate ladder. I'm here to like get better at making large puppets, guys. It was great times. We revisited those squids and kind of increased some of their technology. We also around this time clarified, but prior to this, each year we would kind of just start a whole new project and kind of wipe our slate clean with regard to how we would broadcast the puppet, record it, all those things. We didn't have an identity as a group. We just would like start fresh every year. And so this was about the time that we started to coalesce around like, we're a group that makes these things every year. We're gonna do this for years to come. And so we called ourselves the Colossal Collective. A bunch of what I think I also clarified is like what my role can be in this circumstance. And so much power comes from distributing decisions, distributing ownership among the team. And what I've found is that if people feel like their choices are going to have a real impact on the finished thing, then they tend to commit themselves more and like really care and want to take some ownership over the outcomes and what they do. And so I try really hard, and I think I've gotten a little better at it, but I still struggle to release the things that aren't what I call mission critical. Those are things that are either like a safety or structures or like liability concern, or yeah, I can tell I've been to business school, right? Or something that harms what I call like the 100-foot view. So if the choice is going to like start to pull the audience away from the dragonfly-ness of the puppet, then I see that as my main role, is to keep it within the bounds of the mission critical, like, is it gonna be safe? And then is it going to read like the creature from a distance? And then beyond that, like empower people and give them the like, all right, you are gonna do this part of the puppet. You're gonna make it right now. And whatever you make is gonna be the thing, you know? So I don't have a design. I can talk through, you know, what I think could work, but then you're gonna go and you're gonna craft the feet of this mammoth, and then they're gonna be the feet of the mammoth. And I love that because it's such an empowering thing. Next year, we built this amazing spider that stomped around Treefort and really was a great time. We did learn that it's probably a bad idea to make a puppet that you really can only turn on if you've got 12 people like ready to go. It gets harder as the week gets longer. ready to go, like motivated, have energy, are making good decisions and can work together, follow instructions. It's a hard, so from there we were like, that was awesome, but we want to make something that looks good on its own and we don't have to like have all the people there to turn it on. So this was the next one. This was this gorilla named Jungle Blizzard. He was awesome, huge, and kind of very much the inspiration for Mortimer Maximus. That year we had a real tussle at the Colossal Collective. There was Team Giant Gorilla and Team Woolly Mammoth, and the gorilla won, but it's funny because, like, you know, sometimes you got to just be patient, you know, and let things simmer, let the team learn, and then when it's time for the mammoth, it's you know, that's when it's like really going to shine. We made these awesome peacocks the next year, and went kind of off the deep end and trying to like, you know, get some more complicated mechanisms that do really cool, complex mechanical things. The puppet had, you know, it had this amazing tail that would open and close, and it was just like bristling with addressed LEDs. Every single LED on there was coded in many different ways so that we could like model these patterns out in real time and sort of adjust them. We're using like a soundboard or a light board and kind of like cue up light patterns and mix them together and do just very, very cool things. And we had mechanical beak and eyes that blinked, and took years off our lives getting those mechanisms to work. And so we were kind of like in shell shock from that a little bit. And then we found this, we wanted to go a little bit more like, I think what we did was we hit our stride with regard to some of the materials. With the gorilla, I'm gonna go back a slide or two. We got donated, we accidentally landed upon this giant pile of leftover foam from Masana Climbing Gym, which makes crash pads that you take into the mountains, right? And so I had a friend who worked there, and she was part of the Colossal Collective, and she calls me up, and she's like, we're getting rid of like a mountain of foam. And I was like, I'll be there now. And so drove over, loaded my, you know, strapped my truck full of this foam, and then we found that it's a really cool sculpting material. You can weld it, you can cut it, you can kind of like do a bunch of things to it. It's rigid enough that you can, it holds itself up, but it's also flexible and pliable and easy to work. And then what really got us fired up was this blend of taking a canvas that you can print on and then gluing it, welding it to this foam. And so then you're really free to make shapes that are durable and strong, but also light and hold their own form, and then you can print on them. So really cool, like joint material that we were like, this is awesome, let's run with this for a little bit. Plus this Barry Romantis was his name. He needs a girlfriend. And so we made him Bitsy Romantis. And so they basically have stomped around Treefort quite a bit. They're great. They look awesome by themselves. They've got one puppeteer can activate them in a bunch of different ways. They can sort of, they're on a fulcrum and they can move around, and so you can really do a lot with one puppeteer, but you can also engage a bunch of other people, and you can make it walk and move its head and do all kinds of fun stuff. So it can put 8 people to work, but it can also like look great on its own or just by itself, or one puppeteer kind of like babysitting it. We made this pangolin puppet, which I feel like is this was our first one coming out of the pandemic, and obviously it was hard for us, and we kind of like, we did some really awesome work with these lights. The lighting in this puppet was beautiful, and it could be addressed in so many cool ways. We really like, I don't know, I think that it's a bit of a sore spot for me personally, because we sometimes in the Colossal Collective, we only have so much storage space, and there is this like, we love making new ones, but we oftentimes end up with an old one that we are like not using as much. It's a challenge to put together, or there's some facet of it that's harder than we thought it was gonna be. And so we don't use it, and then the next thing you know, it's like, we've got this kind of beat up older puppet that we need to process into like usable parts and make room for our next puppet. I'm actually getting emotional about this. This last weekend, in order to make room for our upcoming, to store Morty Maximus, our woolly mammoth, we had to like process this pangolin puppet, and it just breaks my heart, you know, a little bit of like taking it apart and using those parts to like put into the next puppet. So sorry, Percy. This is Spermantha. This was like our attempt to like use a different format and a different way of supporting these puppets. And Spermantha was really cool and still is around and looks great. So light once you're like supported from that slack line. So it doesn't move around, and I think it's okay. It's like we kind of tested it out, and it looks great as an installation, and it's sort of it's just delightful to see and feel the full size. This is a sperm whale skeleton. They're really cool creatures, and to get to be around like a 55-foot long life-size skeleton of a real critter that runs around the ocean is just super fun. And so Spermantha's awesome. And then this is our upcoming one. I'll get some more like slides on that as we get a little further on, and you get to see some of the process of how we make them. So 10 easy steps, how to build a giant freaking puppet. Pick a creature. There's so many cool ones, right? That's the easy part, super fun. I do think it's good to, when you're doing that, focus on the shapes and like zoom out, stop thinking about the textures, stop thinking about the like what the creature, just think about the shapes and then what's the essence, right? When you think of a squid, what feature of the squid is like critical for squiddiness? The tentacles, the arms, right? The big eyes. So if you can nail big eyes, good looking tentacles, and some like squiggly arms, you're probably gonna have it read as a squid from 100 feet. So that's the fun part. And then it's also like, how complex does its movement need to be in order to maintain that essence of the creature? And the more you can kind of pare it down and boil it down and reduce it, the better. And it's only because if you look at some of our first puppets, very simple shapes. The squid is just basically a balloon. Who hasn't made a paper balloon where you like cut the slits and tape it together, or a paper lantern, something like that? Pretty simple. Same with the dinosaur. It's like two cones. It's a tail cone, it's a neck cone, and then it's some cylinders for your legs, Sculpt a head, you're in business. You've got dinosaur, and really like what's the essence of the dinosaur? The scale, it's huge. So pay attention to that 100-foot view. Look at the characteristics of see? Told you I was gonna click the wrong slide. Research like crazy. So this is sort of like get over yourself. You're not the first person to do anything. You can go ahead and click that video if you could. And someone else has done it. They've done a much better job. They've probably done it using like hundreds of millions of dollars. This was the Broadway production of King Kong the musical, Sydney Opera House. The crane that held this guy up was something like 6 tons. It was hoisted in the ceiling, this massive crane. 30 operators. It has hundreds of servos in its face to control every movement of it. Look at that guy. Just incredible. So when we were researching for the gorilla, for Jungo Blizzard, we were like, oh, that's what we're shooting for. And then there's this awesome feature of scaling that I was kind of talking about before, of like, this puppet, I don't know, but tens of millions of dollars is my estimate for how much it cost. And when we were getting ready to start building Jungo Blizzard, we were like, guys, we got 3,000. But I threw that up there as like, that's what we're shooting for. Let's see how well we can do. And we got it pretty darn, was it, same factors apply, right? Was it 10,000 times less cool? No way. It was like a factor of maybe, a hundredth, but still it was with the way cool. Okay, so we can pull that slide off and keep going. Thank you. Step 3, sketch like crazy, be really observant, really curious, and start. I think that a huge part of my process for a lot of the like design components has to do with drawing those shapes over and over and over again. Drawing the essence of the critter over and over and over again until it's like baked in and you're like, I have squiddiness. I know where the squid is in the shape, right? And I can sort of like really connect to the squiddiness, the dragonflyness, the dinosaurness. Uh-oh, my dongle might be disconnected. Oh. Can we pull the dongle out maybe and reset it? Oh. Let's see, maybe I can. Okay, we're probably, I clicked it a bunch. Okay, After you're ready to, after you've sketched a ton, I think that it's really powerful to also take it into some digital format. I'm not good at this, so I'm using pretty simple tools. I'm using like a 2D design tool, either Illustrator or Inkscape or Corel. And then, you know, some pretty simple 3D design tools to just get some senses of scale and see it in 3 dimensions. But the beautiful thing about the software is that it allows you to iterate quickly. So I can make a small version of this, and I can cut it out with the laser cutter, and I can tune it quickly and cheaply. You can also scale things easily and without any effort. So it's great for taking your small design and going like, we like that, and then making it the full-size plan. This is sort of something that we've learned over time and have our sort of bank of knowledge of what works and what we like. And it has to do something with like, okay, you like the critter, you like the shapes, and you're starting to come together with like some of the ways that it's gonna move or work, but you have to pick the scale. And usually our goal is to go like, let's pick the absolute biggest thing that we can feasibly imagine pulling off, right? And then sometimes we find ourselves going like, oh, it's way too big, this will never work. But usually we just figure it out, and we kind of like have an intuitive sense of like what our materials can handle and what the right scale for this puppet is. I have another video. Sorry. So small models are critical to take it out of the drawings and the flat, and you start to learn all sorts of things as you really the materials of like, as you take your idea. This is our idea of how this peacock is going to work. And what's funny is if you could hear the audio, I'm sitting here going, oh, it's going to be so easy. We're just going to walk right up, and then like this thing is just going to fold beautifully. And then it's immediately apparent that these rigid boards, I thought that we were gonna use like pieces of rigid material, and they would kind of fold like this beautiful fan. And then it was like, you hear me realizing that this is absolutely a flawed design, and I would not have gotten there without the small scale prototype. So we do a lot of that. It's a critical component, and it's really fun, and it's totally worth the additional like time it takes to build the small model, because it can save you a ton of time later on. So yep, I'm failing there, and failing dramatically, but that's great. We went through it a couple more times, and there we go. Okay, once you've got your small scale prototypes out of the way, then it's time for the larger things. You want to go really fast and really cheap. You're trying to figure out, does this material behave the way I want it to? Does it do the thing that I see in my mind? And so often there is this, even from the small scale prototype, there's this like crazy difference in how things work once they scale up, and especially when you're using cheap materials that aren't designed to do that thing. Don't advance my slide without me. There we go. So we do this all the time, and we oftentimes recycle and use stuff from previous puppets. So this is a trunk idea, right? And we were kind of like looking at other trunks that we've seen online, and then we used some old gorilla fur that we keep around, and then some foam from a previous project, and kind of like, okay, this has trunkiness to it, and maybe it'll work for our mammoth trunk. And then we also were like, oh, look, we've been inspired by some of the more complicated like Hollywood level trunk ideas or tails or stuff like that. And so we can get some interesting, cool movement, but we're sitting here going, this is what, 4 feet tall, and our trunk is 13, 14 feet long, if you include the whole like portion that goes up into the head. And so like we were able to feel the like leverages, and oftentimes it's like, oh man, we're never gonna be able to get this trunk to like move like we want it to using these cheap materials. If we were working with carbon fiber and a bunch of like aerospace engineers on it, yes, we could definitely get there. But we're not building satellites, we're building stuff out of PVC and cheap foam. So using cheap materials, recycling, and going fast is the priority there. Iterate until you're blue in the face. Like, we made so many shapes, and so often I think that there's other ways of doing this, but our process is oftentimes just sort of trying something, learning from it, trying it again. So many different shapes that we went into to try to make these leg shapes for the mammoth, and we ended up throwing them all out. So it's kind of like sometimes you got to just go, we're barking up the wrong tree, and release that and be okay with it. Sometimes it's the simple thing that gives you what you want. There comes a point in every project that we've done where it's like, okay, the deadline is coming up, and it's time. We've learned as much as we can, and now we're out of time, and it's time to kick the ladder out and like buy $1,200 worth of faux fur. This is our dog Fig, just like loving this time. She was just like, oh my goodness, this is so cool. But once you've kicked that ladder out and you're like, that budget has been allocated, we can't go back, this is the fur that we're gonna use, then it's kind of freeing because you're like, all right, any other problems that is created from that choice, we will figure out. We trust that we've got the collective problem solving to do it. And then it's like, divide up the work, put your head down, and then sprint or sometimes lumber to the finish line. Sometimes this is a great case in point. Quick little case study of peacocks. Looking at peacocks, there's so many images of peacocks and paintings of peacocks or visual representations of it where you see the tail and it doesn't look quite right. Like the spots don't quite seem like they're in the right position. And every now and then I would look at peacock pictures and I would see like, oh my gosh, there's totally an order. There's method to this madness. They're not random and they're also not in like pure circles. They're not just like concentric circles, right? There's something else that I don't quite see here. And so a lot of it was about talking to people, showing them things, playing and trying to draw the designs, sketching like crazy and sort of going like, hey, there's a reason why those eye spots are placed where they are, talking to friends who know a lot more about math than I do, and then ultimately realizing that it's two overlapping layers of Fibonacci spirals. One going one way, one going the other way, and when you create those two, they mesh together and the intersections are where the eye spots are. So then, it's like, okay, let's figure out now where we're gonna make our lights that go one way, and then our eye spots are gonna be a different type of light, and then nailed it. Like, oh, let's get some more stuff. This was the failed design that it didn't like. And then ended up with just this awesome, beautiful, like light array that even though it's still like a symbol of the peacock, that like placement of the eye spots, when it moved around and when it did stuff and when the lights shone, it really kind of like, peacockiness, it's like got this eye spots are right. So that process was really satisfying and it was just a cool puppet. Put your work together, organize it, divide up some stuff, allow people to just go like, all right, I'm gonna take this part on, I'm making mammoth toenails today, and those are gonna be the toenails that are on the mammoth from here on. Here's an example of how many physical large-scale prototypes it took to get to the head shape that we wanted. And so we started with one design and realized like, oh, it works at one size. We made a 50% scale model for Mortimer. And we were like bending these poles and kind of like that felt satisfying and it worked. So we tried to scale that one up and it totally was like, as soon as those 14-foot long tusks are cantilevering out, it smashed the prototype apart and we were like, that's not gonna be strong enough. We need to use more triangle shapes. Mocked up a couple more, and then finally we're like, okay, this is it. So we have a simple aluminum, head that's nice and light, holds those poles with tons of, it's like there's all of that weight it's strong enough to support what it needs to. And the big thing, the fulcrum is in the right spot. That took a long time to figure out. Again, if we had a different, like if there were people on the team who had that like modeling machine parts, we would probably use that toolkit. But for us, it's sort of like we just keep iterating, stumbling on, and crashing our way to something that'll work. A couple more just like, this is the trunk form or like tool that we ended up using, and it's much simpler than both of these, but it works great. It's this like beautiful, fun, lively trunk, and I hope you all get to interact with it in a couple of hours. So that's really all I got. I'm not gonna even reveal Morty himself. You gotta go down there and see him. You gotta go see him. So thank you so much. Thank you for coming to my little talk. Appreciate it. We still have a couple minutes, so I could do some questions. Yep.
Hi. Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for that. That was really cool. I saw a presentation from a different, puppet production company, and they said they use a lot of zip ties. Do you guys use a lot of zip ties?
Thank you so much for this question. Yes, zip ties are really handy, but we kind of don't like the fact they're single use. And so we found a much better solution. It's bungee balls and grommets. And so if you use a grommet machine, it like creates a stronger hold point. And then the bungee ball can be used hundreds and hundreds of times. We have bungees that have been in service for years, you know? And then they can also, actually, the plastic ball can be recycled for other purposes too. So it's a much better, longer term. And so, oh my gosh, yes, we've maybe, I mean, some of our puppets have required thousands of grommets and bungees. It's wild, but it's a great tool. It's so simple. Anybody can do it. It's really strong. You know, I think it's actually probably stronger than a zip tie, or like most zip ties. And then you don't feel as bad for, you know, you're not cutting them up and throwing them away. And they don't make those sharp edges that you can cut yourself on. So bungee balls, zip tie, or bungee balls, grommets, way better than the single use, you know, yeah.
So I wanted to get your input on what you would recommend to artists that maybe don't have as much of like the engineering mindset that you might have, or the materials and space to
Totally.
be able to weld giant
Yeah.
aluminum structures and stuff like that. Like, what would be a good place to start?
Good question. And I think that honestly, I empathize with this a ton, because it, you know, it took us over a decade to get to the point where we're using aluminum that we're welding, and we've got a large space that we got a grant for down at Jump to build this thing, right? So it's not like you just wake up and are there. I think what you have to do is start simple. Pick an animal that has simple shapes that you're like, I know already how I can make this shape. I've done it before in another context. So with the squid, it was like, I've made a balloon, right? I've made a paper lantern. So I've got that, like, that part, the core, one of the core squiddiness components is like ready to go. And then it becomes sort of like, you know, there's a whole bunch of delightful problems you get to solve downstream. And then the other thing is the scale. Like, just start a little bit smaller that feels more manageable and reasonable. And then you don't want to see it as like you're going straight to the point of building the biggest creatures. You want to go, we're going to build one and get it out the door and show it to people. And I guarantee you, like, if you make it and do it and get people's eyes on it, it's gonna feel good. It's gonna be satisfying. And even if it breaks, I mean, we've gotten a lot better at making stuff that's durable. But our first couple of puppets, it was nonstop. Like, we just kept rolls of duct tape on our arm. And it was just like, oh boy, and just like tape the tar out of it again, you know? And so, so much of it is just like, you have to learn, and you start with just something that's like simple. Pick an easy animal, easy shape, and go with a scale that you can work with. That first one you get out the door, if that goes well and you're satisfied and you get some good feedback on it, it becomes so much easier to do a second one. Yeah.
So where is your next puppet and what time?
Good question there. Thank you so much. We're not necessarily presenting Mortimer as we are. We are sort of like caretaking. You know, we're sort of like going to hang out and keep him activated and then move him around. So he will be down at Julia Davis Park the whole time. And there's two sides to the park. There's like the main stage side, which is the ticketed side that's behind a fence. And then there's the like free public side that has a whole bunch of stuff there. He'll be going back and forth. And so he'll spend about half his day out in the one side, and then he'll go back and probably watch some of the bigger shows, because he loves to see some of those big shows, you know. And what's really fun that we have not gotten to do yet is see how much dancing we can get out of this puppet. Like, the first event that we took Morty to didn't have like music that we wanted to dance to as much, and so we are so excited to get to like shake that mammoth a little bit, you know. But yes, Julia Davis Park, for the entire time that the main stage is activated. So I've got crew showing up at 2 p.m. today, and they'll be there till the main stage area closes at 10. And then as far as which side of the park it's going to be on, I can't guarantee. We're going to kind of play it by ear, but during the middle of the day, it should be out on the free side for a good chunk of the day. Yeah.
You mentioned like going to business school to kind of become, you know, keep doing art. What's like the business model for this, or like does Treefort commission this?
Good question there. So we are not doing this to like pay our bills. We all kind of recognize that there's this sweet spot. The scale of the materials and that sort of like scaling factor of the decreasing rate of return as you invest more money, it doesn't necessarily mean the proportionate increase in coolness. I think that it also works that way for how much time we spend and what portion of our lives it takes up. So it's effectively a hobby. It is a business. I do like have it as a business entity so I can take the money that we get from grants and you know, just like write it off as my business expenses. But for the most part, we're trying to just like, we don't have infinite energy and we don't want this to be something we do every single week. So the sweet spot for us is apparently like, the other thing I got to mention is, you know, we started this, I think I was still in my 30s. Now, I mean, I was still in my 20s and now I'm in my 40s. So there's definitely like this energetic, like we don't want to do it that much or that hard. Treefort is the longest event we'll do, I think. So we do apply for grants, and we oftentimes apply for grants at events that we want to go to anyway. And like getting a little bit of money to go to an event that we wanted to be at anyway is a good way of doing it. Gives us lots to do while we're there. Yeah.
You mentioned a bit about like reusing puppets and how that's kind of hard for you. And I totally get that.
Yeah.
Because I do feel like a lack of space is really difficult as an artist who like creates large scale
Yeah.
things, large scale sculptures in particular. Do you like recycle every puppet that you make, or do you have like a storage space where they live as well?
We have like, we try to go, what are the things that are either really valuable still, you know, so a lot of the like electronic components can be used and repurposed again. We try to keep things that are like really unique elements of each puppet. So we keep something that's like, it's just to keep it for our sentimental sake. And then if it's like a really easily reused material, so for instance, that gorilla puppet, we had these just huge, they were shapes that were like very, you know, we put tons of work into making these really cool like limb shapes, but they also were just like these huge chunks of fabric. And we were like, we'll use those again. They're ratty, they've been used a lot, but they are gonna be great for accents in other puppets or for testing and prototyping. We do throw stuff away, and that, you know, oh gosh, some of the more, you know, like just like with Percy taking apart that pangolin last week, like, oh, taking those, the peacock tails are one of the more, another like just painful spot, because we were like, we have to make room for these. There's so many broken wires in there that we don't want to put that work into it. And they're one fused giant object, like the lights were glued into the fabric, which was like all connected to this mechanism. And so, taking the tail of the peacock to the landfill was just like heartbreaking. So we have thrown stuff away, and but we really try to keep as much of it, because there's oftentimes like delightful surprises about like, hey, let's use this part of this puppet in the next one, and that feels really good because it's kind of like living on. And then also sometimes those materials that are on hand are great. You know, they kind of like lead to things that you wouldn't have chosen to do if you were designing it from a clean slate. Let's take two more and then we can call it. Yeah.
Are there any parts in Mortimer that are from older puppets? Like you like fully be like, that's it?
Well, a lot of the foam, and you know, like we sort of just scavenge a bunch of stuff. The cart itself is the cart that we built for that giant dinosaur. So we started with this like support structure that was like, this is a great, you know, and we've had to like tune it and model it and rebuild it. And twice now I've said, cool, let's scavenge the cart parts, and then be like, no, let's rebuild the cart. And so whatever the case, yes, there's plenty of pieces, but a lot of it was, we used a bunch of the fur and foam from previous puppets in the prototyping process. We were like, okay, I can allow my team to like make these panels and then make smaller scale prototypes. So we had a bunch of stuff that was like, we used the real materials that we wanted to use, and we got to test at like 50% or even like one full size leg component. And that was so valuable, and it allowed us to move really quick. We didn't save all of it. We did throw some of it away, but it was like using those materials on hand for the testing and prototyping was like, saved us so much. Don't have to wait for the roll to get here and then, you know, commit to the whole like kick out the ladder part. It's like we had it on hand. One more if you got it. Yeah.
So what is the time frame and how many?
Ooh, like our progress or our project timeline?
When did you start the prototype? How long did it take to build it?
Well, Morty is an exception, I think, because we really like I said, in 2018 or 17, when we built the gorilla, we were sitting there like in that early phase of what animal, what shapes, what scale. And we really explored that puppet design back then. So arguably all the way back to 2018 or 2017. And then we had a weird year last year where we were kind of like, I don't know. Last year is the first year we didn't like build a whole new puppet. I guess the answer is we spent a lot of time with this sort of feverish, like we have to build one by Treefort every year. And last year we were like, we're getting old. We need to like take it easier. And so we set up 2 other existing puppets at Treefort, and it was still a great event, but we didn't like force ourselves to like, you know, puppeteer harder, puppeteer more. Now it's Treefort, you know? And so this time we'd been simmering on that idea for a long time. I think our first small scale model was over a year ago. And then we let it simmer. We'd kind of come to it when we had time, but it wasn't what accelerated the whole process and really turned it. Steps like 3 through 10 all occurred between November and November and Illumibrate, which happened a couple weeks ago. And the reason is that we got a grant from Jump with a deadline. The deadline is what does it, right? It's like, you know, so we by signing something that said we'll have a finished mammoth on this day, that really kicked it into gear, and it inspired us all to be like, okay, let's commit the regular time, and then, you know, just forced it out. So a lot of gratitude to Jump for hosting us in their artist residency space. They have a really cool space that's not part of the main building, and they have open applications right now for their next residency. And so it's not a lot of cash, but the space is awesome. And just getting to utilize that art space, I think, was another like catalyst and really accelerated, you know, the timeline, because we only had a 3-month residency in that space. So usually it's like the deadline that does it. Thank you guys so much, and I hope you go have fun meeting Morty, and have a great Treefort. Great hack for it.